Abbas I, 1571 to 1629. The Shah of Persia, under whose rule the Safavid dynasty reached the height of its territorial expansion, and whose reforms are widely considered to have laid the foundations for the modern Iranian state. The last great Shah of Persia, Abbas I suppressed the Turkoman chieftains who had dominated Iran militarily and politically throughout the 16th century, as well as their Qizilbashi supporters. The first Shah of Persia to grasp what was happening in the Western world and to understand its significance for his empire, he actively sought to modernize his army and to open his country to outside influences. Dynamic and ruthless, he forced entire populations to settle in Persia and made his capital, Isfahan, one of the storied cities of the Muslim world. For all this, his regular family life and his inability to arrange for a suitable successor did much to undermine his life's work in the decades that followed his death.
The origin of the Safavid dynasty may be traced to the Safaviya, a widespread Sufi order founded by Sheikh Safi circa 1300 and centered at Ardabil in Persian Azerbaijan. The Sufi orders were associations of Islamic men and women determined to seek a closer union with God through the practice of various religious disciplines. The period of Mongol rule in Persia from 1252 to 1334 had seen a decline in the official rational theology of Islam and a rise in various elements of popular or folk religion, including a devotion to miracles, the cult of Islamic saints, pilgrimages to sacred shrines, and a great increase in mysticism. Sufi orders grew rapidly in this period, and the Safaviya was one of the most important. Ismail Safi, founder of the dynasty, was sheikh of the Safaviya order, and the Safavid Shahs continued to hold this position, thereby creating a religious support for their rule. Ismail Safi was a grandson of the great Turkoman chieftain Uzun Hasan, lord of the Akkuyunlu Turkoman confederation that had dominated Persia in the mid and late 15th century. But the Safavid dynasty was not otherwise of Turkoman origin. The Turkomans were a mass of Turkic tribesmen who had entered Persia in the wake of the Mongol invasions, and had settled in Azerbaijan both north and south of the Eryx River. The Safavids, as natives and rulers of Persia, were naturally inclined to support the civilization of Iranianism, and this created many difficulties in maintaining peace between the Turkoman chieftains who had formed the dynasty's chief support, and the Persian masses over whom it ruled and whose culture it was committed to. Although Sheikh Safi had been a Sunni Muslim, Ismail secured the allegiance of Iran to Shi'ism as the religion of Persia. I would like to turn your attention to a key part of Safavid rule, that is, the Qizilbashi. The term Qizilbashi, so called from the color of their headdress, which means redheads, has meant various things at different times, in different places, and under different circumstances. For the Safavids, however, they were essentially a mixed group of ethnic elements, predominantly Turkic in origin, who formed a military force devoted to the Safaviya order. If the sheikh of the Safaviya was indeed the voice of religious authority, then the Qizilbashi troops were his military defenders to the outside world. Thus, you can think of the Qizilbash to be considered something of a military religious organization. Abbas was born on January 27, 1571. The second son of Shah Muhammad Qutbanda. Tutored by his guardian Ali Quli Khan Shamlu, the governor of Herat, Abbas came to the throne on October 16, 1587, at the age of 16, as a result of a coup d'etat that had overthrown his father. The assassination of his eldest brother Hamza the year before had left Abbas heir to the throne, and although an attempt was made to install a younger brother in his place, Abbas succeeded his father as the fifth Safavid Shah, with the support of the governor of Mashhad and that of various elements all over the country. Allowed to live out his days in peace, his father died in 1596, and there appears to be little reason to believe the apocryphal story that he was blinded. The assassination of his brother, the coup d'etat that replaced his father, and the attempts to keep Abbas from ascending the throne were all the result of rivalries between Turkoman and Qizilbashi factions, and Abbas was determined to curb these unruly troublemakers. The chief external threats to Persia at the onset of Abbas's reign were the Ottoman Turks in the west and the Uzbek tribes in the east, who had entered into alliance with one another, attacking the country simultaneously. The Turkish military presence at Derbent on the Caspian Sea provided easy contact between the two allies. The Uzbeks were tended to first by the new Shah, who crushed them speedily, seizing the cities of Herat, Mashhad, and Merv. The Turks were of a more formidable opponent, and for the end of the 16th century saw the zenith of Ottoman glory. The Turks now ruled the whole of the Middle East except Persia, and the whole of North Africa except for Morocco, and were the greatest power in Eastern Europe. Incredibly rich, well-organized, well-governed, and possessing a superb military force, the empire reached the height of its territorial expansion in 1595, rivaling the greatness of the Byzantine Empire under Justinian, and in some ways, even surpassing it. The attention of the Turks was drawn to Caucasia by the various Georgian states, which in their struggles with one another appealed to either the Sultan or to the Shah for support. The Sixth Ottoman-Safavid War from 1578 to 1590 had begun over a civil war in the Georgian Principality of Samshke, and had ended with the Turks masters of the whole of Caucasia from the Black Sea to the Caspian. Unfortunately, the harsh climate and the rugged terrain greatly raised the price of maintaining these conquests, and the problems of communication and logistics during the long and bitter winters put an enormous strain, even upon the vast resources of the Ottoman Empire. At first, Abbas bowed before Ottoman might, his initial response to the Turks being to end the war that was raging as he ascended on the throne, even if it meant doing so entirely on Ottoman terms. In the years of 1603 to 1612, however, Shah Abbas, sensing advantage in increasing Ottoman internal problems, counterattacked, thereby initiating the Seventh Ottoman-Persian War. Overextended in Caucasia, no longer led by able commanders as they had been in their previous campaigns, and weakened by a massive wave of banditry in Anatolia that even they seemed unable to curb, the Turks were driven back to the frontier of 1578, save that they retained a suzerainty over Dagestan and Tarku, with which they were in ready communication via the North Caucasian steppes. In the course of these campaigns, Armenia suffered greatly. Yerevan was taken by the Turks in 1582, retaken by the Persians in 1604, and underwent a 4-month siege by the Turks in 1615, although it did not finally fall to them again until 1635. Secure in the wealth and prosperity of his empire and the loyalty of his reorganized army, Shah Abbas began to reach out to the world beyond his immediate realm, establishing diplomatic contacts with the Mughal emperors of India, the Khan of Crimea, and the Tsars of Muscovite Russia, sending emissaries to Vienna, London, Lisbon, and other European capitals, and welcoming foreign residents including merchants, technicians, artists, and missionaries, chief among the latter being Carmelite, Augustinian, and Capuchin monks. The major domestic problems that beset Abbas upon his ascension to the throne were the weaknesses caused by Turkoman tribalism, the rivalry between the Turkic and Iranian elements in Persia, and the general poverty and backwardness of the realm. The most pressing need was to suppress the independence of the unruly Turkoman military leaders who held the most commands in the Safavid army. Moving swiftly and firmly, and consistently working towards the centralization of his administration, Abbas reorganized the army, thereby equipping it with cannons and rifles brought in by European specialists who trained his soldiers in their use. He also curbed the power of the Turkoman chieftains and the Qizilbashis, suppressed the local fiefdoms, abolished the independent tribal states, annexed the formal vassal states, and expanded his crown lands, i.e. those directly under the control of the Shah and whose revenues flowed directly into his own accounts. Abbas also took spirited action to improve the economic situation of the country by developing the roads, stimulating trade and industry, building a network of caravanserais for the ease and comfort of travelers, inviting in European merchants and traders, and finally by importing large numbers of commercial populations, sometimes by force. Struck by the commercial enterprise of the Armenians encountered in his campaigns, and desirous of leaving nothing but scorched earth for the Turks, Shah Abbas transported much of the entire population of eastern Armenia to Iran in 1603, for it was to be settled in commercial and agricultural communities in the Safavid realm. The greatest bulk of the deportees apparently came from the town of Julfa, for the whole population was forced to move, and the town burned behind them. Those who survived the trek to Isfahan were settled in a new suburb across the river to the south of the Safavid capital, for they formed a community that quickly became the foreign quarter for Catholic missionaries and Western merchants, and which, though much reduced in numbers, still exists to this day. The long-range result of this deportation was to permanently denude the Nakhichevan area of most of its Armenian inhabitants, so much so that under Soviet rule, the area was set up as an autonomous republic within the Republic of Soviet Azerbaijan. But Armenians were not the only Caucasians brought into Iran by Shah Abbas. In 1616, he reportedly brought more than 130,000 men and women as captives from the East Georgian kingdom of Kakheti alone, and there were said to be some 20,000 Georgians already living in Isfahan. Although regarded as slaves and designated as such, the Georgian males were organized into a military corps in imitation of the Ottoman janissaries, who were also technically a slave force. Many Georgians were given positions in the administration, and in some cases, even became provincial governors, while Georgian women were distributed in Persian harems where, because of their beauty, they were the preferred inmates. Of course, the mass of the deported Georgians consisted of simple peasants, and these were settled in villages in various parts of the country, for most of them became Muslims, and intermarrying with their Persian neighbors have disappeared. Chinese ceramicists were also brought to Isfahan to stimulate the development of the ceramic industry, for they had a considerable effect on Safavid pottery and tiles. In the end, Abbas's economic policies were so successful that Persia was able to postpone the inevitable decay of its economy that might have otherwise been brought about by the shift of international trade routes. The discovery and colonization of America had already begun to have a serious and negative effect upon the economy of Ottoman Turkey. After 1603, Abbas succeeded in selling Persian silks and carpets directly to England, completely circumventing the Ottoman Empire by using the Persian Gulf and the route around Africa. Isfahan thronged with Dutch, Portuguese, and English merchants, and the Gulf port of Bandar Abbas underwent rapid expansion. Metalwork, tiles, and ceramics were major products of Persia as well during this time. One of the most successful of Abbas's innovations was the transfer in 1598 of his capital from Qazvin, a hopelessly provincial town which had failed to develop into a significant urban center, to the old and renowned city of Isfahan on the Zayan-Darud River. An oasis blessed with a pleasant climate, fertile soil, ample water, and a well-developed economic life, Isfahan had everything necessary for its development into a capital on a par with other great cities of the East. Architects, artisans, and artists were called in by the Shah to embellish and decorate his new capital, which, lined with trees and canals, soon became one of the largest and loveliest cities in the Islamic world. Indeed, save for the Taj Mahal, erected much later in India, Shah Abbas's constructions at Isfahan are among the last masterpieces of Islamic architecture and represent the high watermark of the Safavid style. Centered around its vast Maidan-e Shah, the city was approximately 20 miles in circumference, housing at one time over 1 million people, and was adorned with a royal palace, beautiful mosques, handsome gates, vast bazaars, and splendid gardens, so much so that there arose in the East the expression, Isfahan is half the world. A contemporary English visitor, Robert Shirley, informs us that Shah Abbas was tall, strong, well-built, and beautifully tanned, and that he was active, wise, temperate, merciful, courageous in battle, and liberal in his outlooks and views. His liberality is most clearly shown by his treatment of non-believers such as Christians and Jews, and his willingness to acquaint himself with the ways of the Western world from which he realized that he had much to learn. On the other hand, he was a superstitious man. He believed in astronomy and the interpretation of dreams, and he bitterly persecuted the Sunni Muslims and the various heterodox sects existing among the Muslims of Iran. A devout Muslim himself of the Shia sect predominating in Iran, he considered himself to be a Sayyid, a descendant of Ali. Although Abbas I had at least 5 sons, the question of who would succeed him as Shah was left unsettled until the very last minute. Fearful of the treachery that had placed him on his own father's throne, Abbas neglected his sons, leaving them to be raised in the hothouse environment of the harem. This practice, followed by his successors, guaranteed the incompetence of each new ruler as he ascended the throne, and did nothing more else than to lead to the decay of the dynasty, and with it the entire realm. The second and fourth sons died young. The eldest, Safi Mirza, a man of good character and popular with the people, was suspected of having entered into a conspiracy with his father's numerous enemies, and Abbas had him stabbed to death at the age of 27. His third son was blinded by his father, along with his son Suleiman, and the fifth was blinded at the end of the reign. Thus, by the time of his death, none of Abbas's sons were able to rule, and after he died at his summer palace in Ashraf in Mazandaran in January 19, 1629, the Grand Vizier and the commander of the guard arranged with little enthusiasm for the succession of the Shah's deathbed choice, his grandson Sam Mirza, son of Safi Mirza, who became Safi I. Shah Abbas I of Persia was one of the greatest rulers of Iran, and the last truly great ruler produced in the Middle East before the 20th century. Ruthless and determined, he took the first steps needed to bring his country into line with developments in the outside world. His work of political and administrative centralization, although it did not completely destroy the ethnic, tribal, religious, and other centrifugal forces that had always plagued the Persian Empire, at least gave his country a period of stability during which its population enjoyed a higher standard of living than perhaps any other time between the medieval period and the modern age. He made a peace with the Turks that lasted for almost a century, and this long respite from war played no small role in the prosperity that continued in Persia after his death. Abbas's greatest flaw, and it was a fatal flaw, was his complete neglect of the all-important matter of selecting and training a suitable heir to carry on his work. Thank you for listening to the first installment of Let's Learn Leaders. My script, my enthusiasm, and my interest in this topic would not have been possible without Anne Kamir's Historic World Leaders Encyclopedia, so I would love to give credit for credit is due.